Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Vijay Kannan. I am the head of the management department here in the Huntsman School of Business at Utah State University. It's a pleasure to welcome you this morning to the first in the Lean Educator webinar series. Many of you may know that a couple of years ago, we reinstituted the Lean Educators Conference at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. And obviously last year with COVID, and now as we continue to sort of come out through the other end of the COVID situation, obviously conferences are a little more challenging, but so as not to lose momentum and so that we can continue to make sure that the word is out there and we're sharing best practices and teaching Lean. What we are doing this summer and hopefully beyond is having this series of webinars, monthly webinars, where we're going to have some outstanding advocates of and practitioners of teaching of Lean share with us their experiences and insights in terms of how we can do it and do it well. So this morning, delighted to have with us Professor Mike Dixon. Mike is an associate professor of operations and management here in the Huntsman School of Business at Utah State University. Mike is a long history using cases in the classroom. Mike is not only an award-winning case writer. He was formerly a faculty member at the Ivey School of Business in Canada. Many of you may know that Ivey is one of the bastions of case teaching globally. And obviously Mike has certainly had considerable experience, not only teaching with cases and writing cases for the classroom. So this morning, he is going to talk to us about how you can use cases to teach Lean. With that, I'll turn it over to you, Mike.
Thanks, Vijay. Thanks everybody for coming. I'm excited to share with you just a couple sort of cases that I've used in the last few years that you might want to consider using. But I mean, really, here's my agenda. My next one is just to describe a little bit who I am and then have a discussion a bit about why would you want to use cases as a pedagogical tool to think about teaching Lean or teaching anything, but we're specific about Lean today. And then I have this O.C. Tanner case that I'd like to discuss a little bit, and then this other case that's a very kind of informal, not a normal traditional case about FastCap. So these are two companies, O.C. Tanner and FastCap, that if you've kind of done any kind of Lean stuff, you know that these are companies that are really amazing when it comes to what they've done in the past. So they're great case studies. So let's talk about who's me. So by the way, first of all, I apologize that this guy couldn't come. You got me instead. This is like a picture of me 10 years ago. I tried to get a new picture last year and I had it all scheduled. And then the day before I got an email that said, our photographer got COVID, they're not coming. And I haven't heard anything since. So I hope the photographer is okay, but they said they were going to reschedule. So anyway, sorry for being old, but I got old. That's what happens when you try to get tenure somewhere. Vijay kind of stole my thunder. I was just going to say, I've been doing teaching cases for a long time. When I was at Ivey, I was trained there to, the Ivey School of Business uses only cases in every single class, similar to Harvard, but they focus on undergrads, right? So it's a little kind of a different crew there. And so I've tried to take some of that and put it in a classroom here at Utah State to see if it works. And I had some insights on what works and what doesn't work when the culture is very different and what to expect. At Ivey, the culture is really embedded around cases. Students expect cases and they kind of are trained on how to do it. If your class is anything like mine and you've tried to use a case for an traditional undergrad class, it might not work because the students aren't ready. They don't quite understand how to do cases. Cases have been around for a long time. I guess that's kind of my next thing. Well, actually, here it is. I want to know a little bit more about you. So Mary has a little poll. Mary, go ahead and launch the poll. I'm curious to know who's here, who's out there. I think we have about 13 attendees, looks like. Yep. So I want to know kind of what your background is, just so we can kind of all be together. So if you can there should be a poll that popped up. So take the poll. I could take it too here. Mary, do we got results for that? I can't see the results. But... Oh, there they are. All right, great. So most of us looks like our university faculty members, and then a couple lean practitioners. Welcome, we're glad you're here. And then a few others. So thanks for coming. Very good. So I'm going to focus on sort of my experience as a faculty member teaching traditional classes. The rest of you might be teaching in different ways, right? Training, in a traditional workforce, or maybe doing some other type of training and development. So it'd be interesting maybe towards the end to think about, or to even discuss, how can you use these ideas in an outside of the classroom setting. So I think that'd be kind of fun to hear what you think about it. Great. So let's talk about cases. Case-based methodology has been around for a long time, and it's a tradition in business schools, traditionally in graduate business schools, MBA programs, right? So that comes from Harvard Publishing and Harvard Business School, and among other graduate schools of business that push using this pedagogy. But why do they do it at all? I think I have three reasons in my mind. I think they probably have others, but here's the three reasons I think cases are pretty important and a good pedagogical tool. One, the first one is engaged learning as opposed to passive learning. Now, if you're on this call, you're already an engaged teacher, I think, but the type of, you've probably had classes that is basically passive, right? Students just sit back there and they're just being talked to with a PowerPoint, kind of what I'm doing to you right now. That's disappointing for me, but passive learning, all right? That's not optimal, clearly. So cases force students to be engaged because a good case teacher is going to ask questions and require the students to participate in the discussion of a case. So engaged learning is my first one. The second one is the power of a story. The idea I have here is that when there's a story attached to anything, it becomes more interesting. I mean, we love stories. I love stories. I have three kids. I have three. I should count them. There's three, and they love stories, right? They always want to ask. They want me to tell them stories about when I was a kid. Learning through stories is powerful. Cases is a way to learn through stories. Okay, and then finally is this practicing decision making. A good case requires students to make a decision in a safe place, right? In fact, this is what we'd say at Ivy. They always said, our students, by the time they graduate, have made thousands of executive level decisions, and they haven't really had a job yet. But because of that, they are practiced in making decisions based off of principles and sound objectives. So cases allow students an opportunity in a safe environment to make decisions, and they might be wrong. Oh, they might be right. I mean, we don't always say what the right answer is. In fact, that's kind of my next slide. What makes a good case? Well, again, according to Mike, these are my kind of thoughts. I like a good case that has a protagonist that has a problem. Vijay says this, I've written a bunch of cases, and this is usually how I start out. Give me the problem and right up front, tell me the protagonist, and the protagonist should be someone that the students can see themselves being when they graduate, or maybe even right now, or in a few years, right? This is a problem that they could see themselves having. And then the point of the case then is to think about what are the objectives that I'm going to teach you or introduce to you as your instructor that you can use to solve or understand the problem better. Students don't always understand this. They think oftentimes that case studies are about the company, right? So a case study about O.C. Tanner, they're going to learn about O.C. Tanner. That's not the point of the case. The point of the case is to have some kind of learning outcome, the objective, and that objective should help them understand the problem better. If the case is just about a company, it's not, in my mind, not that great of a case. They could probably look on Wikipedia or something and learn about a company. It should be forcing them to think about how do I use these learning outcomes to solve the problem. And then finally, a good case in my mind, again, is that there's not just one right solution, right? So The student shouldn't have to kind of figure out what's in my head, right? Guess what I think the right answer is. But instead that they can come up with a good reasoning, a set of reasons why they think that this is the right answer, according to some objectives we've learned in class or that they've learned in other places. My big pet peeve is students start their sentence like, well, I feel like the solution should be blah, 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 blah. So this word, I feel like, this, we all say it. This is in our vernacular lately. I feel like the answer should be like this. So that's okay. And really what they're saying is, I'm not sure, but here's an answer. What I say to students when they say that is, why do you feel that way? Like what makes you think that that's a good solution? Give me some more reasoning around your objectives. So again, case studies allow faculty instructors to really force the students to describe why they think what they think. It's pretty weak to say, I feel like this is the right answer. That's the weakest way to say, to make an argument, right? So instead, I encourage them to make an argument based off of some other facts or some other things that we've been learning that would lead them to think about, to feel that way, right? So don't just feel thinking, but actually come up with a reasoned argument for what they're doing. So teaching with cases, here's 3 other kind of points to bring up. Student contribution or participation is key. It's fun. When I first started teaching at Ivy, I taught a few years at another school. I taught at the Naval Postgraduate School at the beginning of my career for 4 years. Used a few cases, but then when you move into Ivy, it's just like full force. And I used to talk about, students aren't participating, and the other faculty members would give me like kind of weird looks. The word participation implies, raising your hand and just saying something and put your hand down. So instead, words matter. We use the term contribution at Ivy, which means we're contributing. The students are contributing to the discussion. They're not just participating, but they're actually contributing to what's going on. So getting students to contribute, and first getting students to participate is sometimes hard, but getting them to that next step of actually having a discussion with one another and contributing to the learning of everyone else is a whole nother level. But it's ideal, right? If we can get there, if the students teach one another through what they've understand and learn, and that the faculty's member is there to guide the discussion and kind of poke, right? And to really get the questions asked. That's the sort of second one, the Socratic type questions are about leading the students unpacking the case. So sometimes students read the case and say, well, this case is straightforward. There's not much here. Then in the classroom, they see that there's so much more going on in the case just by hearing other students talk about what they've seen in the case. When they read something, they understand it in a different way. So the Socratic type questions, and you have to, again, train the students to say, I'm going to ask these questions this way so that we all understand the case better. Not because I don't think you understand it, but so that we get from you, that you can contribute to everyone else's learning. So the last one is, this is a tricky guy too, is it's very nonlinear. A lot of us are used to having an object, like sort of a set of slides, maybe like, this is how I'm going to teach this class. And it's linear, right? It's kind of hard to jump around. In case-based discussions, sometimes you have to be flexible because students might go one direction and it's probably okay to go that direction, maybe not. You can do some things to kind of say, wait, we're not going to talk about that right now, hold that. But other times it's okay to see what the fluid, natural discussion will take us. The more natural a case discussion will be, the more likely students will be involved in what's going on. So I think I have, oh no, that's it. In order to make this work in cases is really cultural. In order to get the classroom, entire classroom, engaged and ready to do cases, students have to come prepared, ready to talk, and they also have to know the expectation, what it is that's expected of them to contribute and to actually be involved in this teaching. And they have to know that this is a different type of classroom, right? So if they're used to traditional classes where the faculty member gets up, on the stage and says they're, amazingly wise things, and that they are really just learning from faculty, we have to sort of remind them that cases are different. We're going to learn in a different way. We're going to learn from one another. In order to do that, they have to be engaged and be able to contribute. Challenges. So this is what I've sort of experienced again. Well, there was challenges at Ivy too. Don't be don't be fooled. In fact, these same things would show up there. But underprepared students, if students show up and haven't read the case, it's going to be really hard to unpack the case, right? So the second case that I'm going to show you is actually sort of a video case where there's very little preparation that they have to do beforehand. And I found that those sorts of activities in a culture where they're not used to having to prepare cases in a traditional way seems to work okay for undergrads. Disengaged students. So again, if students aren't used to actually, being involved in the class, then that's a challenge. So, my classes, regardless if I'm using cases or not, there's a requirement for students to contribute in every single class. They get a grade associated with it. And I have a teaching assistant that will keep track of who's talked and who said what. And at the end of every class, I'll give them a grade. Every single class, every student in my class, I give them a grade for that class on how they're doing. And then we give them feedback. And if some students aren't consistently saying or doing anything, then I'll follow up with them and try to say, hey, this is part of the class. We really need you involved. Some students have a hard time with that. Some people have a hard time. Yes, public speaking is one of the top #1 fears. People, if you ask people, what do you fear most? Public speaking is always at the top of the list. To get students to overcome that in a safe environment at a class is meaningful. And of course, there are some different learning styles and different personalities and different types of people that won't engage in this way. And so maybe we can find different ways to allow them to be engaged. Teaching through Zoom for the last year has been interesting because sometimes for my MBA class, that's happened a lot. I would have one discussion where we'd have different students chiming in and talking, and there'd be a whole nother discussion going on in the chat, right? Or maybe, sort of similar, but different, and different people would be participating in the chat. They're still engaged. They're still involved in what we're doing, but they're saying sort of different things at different times. So that was interesting that I'd never experienced until we had to switch mediums, right? The last case I'd say is unclear objectives. Now, this is something you as a faculty member can control, right? So if you're not really sure what you're supposed to be teaching with this case, then it's probably not going to go well. Right? It has to be really clear in your head, the instructor's head. Why am I using this case? What do I hope the students will get out of this? How am I going to get them to learn those principles? What types of questions am I going to get to allow them to sort of discuss these principles? And it's actually okay to do like a little mini lecture in the middle of a case and say, okay, I'm going to teach you about the EOQ model now for a minute. This isn't something they would probably get out of a case, but let me teach you this a little sort of mini lecture, a 5-minute break, and let's talk about, a certain model or whatever. And then after that, say, now you've learned that, how does that apply to this case? And usually, almost always, the students will be like, holy cow, that makes me think about this case in a totally different way. Now I understand how to think about this problem. So if you can't approach the case with a clear objective, then it's harder to make sure the case is going to be successful. Great. So let's move on.
Before you go on, we do have a question for you.
Go ahead.
And I'm going to turn it over to Eric Olson, who has a question about, how we sort of get more left brain analytical students engaged in that early conversation. So go ahead, Eric.
Okay. Yeah. So Mike, hey, thanks. I like, let's see, okay. So, yeah, so I like what you're saying. This is good stuff. But I was intrigued by when you started talking about the moving away from the feeling to a little bit more of a logical argument.
Right.
But I think, we need to recognize that there are students where that sort of that feeling, emotional side maybe is sort of their entryway, right? Because I've got a lot of students in my MBA class who are coming from a liberal arts background, and they tend to be in that more maybe in that feeling mode, or at least that's my perception. So moving them from the feeling to the logical. Did you have some strategies, or what would that look like, and how would that work maybe?
Yeah, I'll tell you what you probably shouldn't do. I've done this before. You shouldn't come down hard on them and say, don't say that. Like, don't say you feel this way, because it is sort of just in our vernacular. And you're right. There are some students that are probably less sure of themselves. And this is their way to get into the discussion. And that's awesome, right? We want them to get into the discussion. So Eric, I think usually what I end up saying is I just follow up, and I'll tell them several times through the course, if I keep asking you questions, it's not because you're wrong. It's because, and it's not because you're in trouble, right? It's just because I want you to discuss a little bit more, because sometimes students will get intimidated if I keep sort of asking them, well, tell me more, tell me more. Why do you feel that way? You know, I mean, that's like the big question, like really asking sort of the meta question, like, why does that feeling seem right? And then they can say, oh, well, it reminds me of this other case we've done, or it reminds me of something I read, or it reminds me of what you discussed in your mini lecture, right? So just to get them to verbalize why the feeling is there allows like a stronger connection. Yeah.
Very good. Thank you.
Any other pauses, VJ? Any other questions we should?
No, I think that was it for the time being. Let's keep moving along there.
Great. Yeah, I'm open to any questions though. If you have anything, VJ's monitoring the chat, so just go into the chat and ask a question, or the Q&A is what it is.
The Q&A rather than the chat. Yep.
Yep. Great. So let's move on. I want to again talk about these two cases. So this OC Tanner case is a traditional written case that I use in an MBA setting, and then the FastCap is actually a bunch of videos that I'll share. We probably won't have time to watch all the videos, but we'll watch. This PowerPoint will be available that has the links into it, and I find that to kind of be interesting. So let's talk about OC Tanner. So if you've been around sort of the Shingo space, OC Tanner won the Shingo Award many years ago. They're a Utah company. They make and they started out primarily making jewelry and awards for employees for their service, like service awards. They've grown into that space and basically created the award space for employees. So a lot of what they do, they don't make anymore. So there's a lot of supply chain logistics type of things going on with OC Tanner. They're a friend of the university at Utah State here. And so they, one summer I had a student that was looking for an internship. I contacted Gary Peterson and said, hey, can we write a case study? That'd be fun. And he said, yeah. So we hired the student and I kind of coached the student through writing a case study. And we've now used the case study, I think the last 3 or 4 years. That student just barely graduated. He was here for a long time. Anyway, OC Tanner is a fun case. So let me tell you a little bit where this fits into our curriculum. Our MBA program is a 1-year kind of fast program. And so they really only get one supply chain or operations class. And so it's mine. It's called Strategic Supply Chain Management course. We talk a lot about sort of operations, traditional operations stuff in there too, but the focus is on strategy, strategic leadership, decision-making, less on tactics, individual specific little tools, but more about sort of the big picture ideas. So there's a module in there about halfway through the course called Communication, Trust, and Transparency are Paramount, Supplier Relationships and Supply Chain Operations. This case fits in that, which sounds interesting. Like this is, OC Tanner is a lean company. Lean is about this stuff though, really, isn't it? And so we're introducing the lean terms and principles, but it's really in this module about communication and trust. The same module includes the bullwhip effect, which is a big kind of a supply chain. We play the beer game the week before this case usually, which is all about trust and communication. Like how do we make sure that the entire supply chain knows what's going on? So that's the build up to this case. They've already taken a bunch of, we've done a bunch of cases and other things about overall operations and supply chain strategy. We've talked about capacity. We've talked about inventory decisions. And something else I can't remember. Some other aspects. So that's kind of where we're at in the course when I teach this. The details of the case. It's 13 pages long. Here's sort of a summary. The very beginning is the intro to protagonist. His name is Shane Parseval, real person. His problem is he has a new product that's not profitable. That sounds like every company ever, doesn't it? Right? They're making something. It's a popular product. And the customers love it, but they're not making any money off of it. In fact, they're losing money on basically everything they make. So that's the problem that Shane has. Shane is a frontline manager and has a team of 7 or 8 employees. So then the case jumps into the history of O.C. Tanner, about a page and a half. And then it jumps into sort of managerial insights, introduction to the Shingo model. So it compares Taylorism and Deming a little bit. And then it talks about the different principles of the Shingo model, which I'll talk about in a second, and how O.C. Tanner used these to win the Shingo Prize many years ago, and how they use it to solve other problems. So it's not really talking about the problem at hand, but how they've used it to solve other problems. And then at the very end, kind of the reiteration of the first problem. So we're just bringing the problem back at the end of the case. There's 4 embedded videos within the case. These are actually Shingo videos. I'm going to show you one of them in just a second. And then there's a bunch of exhibits at the end that sort of shows some data about what's going on with the problem. And then finally, there's a bunch of footnotes in the case because there's lean terms all over the case that aren't defined. Right? They're just used. And then in the footnotes, there's a definition of what these lean terms are. So if you've been in this space, and all of you have, you know that there's these unique terms in the lean world. If you haven't really been around it, you don't know what these mean. So they sort of show up in the footnotes in hopes that they're getting some ideas of these principles. In fact, I have another slide in a second talking about the objectives. So for preparation for the assignment, I assigned the students to read the case. They also need to read the Shingo model booklet from the Shingo Institute, which is, they kind of put out a new one every once in a while. I'll show it to you in a second. I'm going to switch over to YouTube in just a second, but I'll show you the Shingo model booklet. They need to watch, you have to remind them, you have to watch these 4 videos that are embedded. And then here's the questions I asked the students. What's going wrong with O.C. Tanner's new products? It's pretty obvious what's going wrong, but to unpack, I mean, obvious that they just aren't able to make it profitably. They need to cut the amount of time it takes to make this product. There's some wasted time going on. There also might be some wasted, some wasted product as well. It doesn't explicitly say there's quality problems, but there could be, right? So we say what's wrong, then you have to kind of ask the questions more in the class. Well, why would they? What could solve that, right? Sometimes it's not always intuitive to the students that they could lower the cost of the product by making it faster and being able to do it in a more lean way. And then this is the big one: how managers use the Shingo model to solve this problem. So in a second, I'll kind of spoil that for you. And then the second question is, if we had visitors from O.C. Tanner or the Shingo Institute, which I'm lucky enough that I can do that pretty regularly, what questions would you have for them about these principles and how they apply to supply chain decisions? So those are the 2 kind of big questions I have them think about and address before class. So the case looks something like this. Again, it's 13 pages long. So by the way, this case at the end, I'll give you again my email address. I'd be happy to share this with you. This will be published shortly. Utah State, the Huntsman School is starting a Huntsman case series, which will be an open education resource series. So not to compete with Ivy or Harvard, because it's not going to cost anything for you or your students to use these cases. So this is a case that if you want to take a look at, you certainly can. If you want to use it in your class, that's certainly okay too. So this is kind of the first paragraph. Just want to give you an idea of what it looks like. Here's the objectives of the case and why I would use this. First, students are introduced to lean principles, tools, and ideas, right? So they're all throughout the case. They're going to pick up some of these ideas. And finally, this is the big one. Shingo's students should understand how the Shingo model and guiding principles lead to tactical, day-to-day, on-the-ground decisions and influence problem solving. So I think in my mind, if you kind of read the Shingo model booklet or sort of see some of the visualizations, you say, this is really great. This is awesome. This is a really good philosophy. I really like this philosophy. And in fact, lean in general is a philosophy, isn't it? But to actually see how this philosophy hits the workers day to day, this case does a great job of that, right? Like how does that actually change what the workers do day to day, and how do they solve problems because a company believes in this philosophy? That's the point of this case. And in that case, I think it's a kind of inspiring, right? To really see that there's been successful companies that have changed their culture entirely and empowers their employees to make big differences, right? So, the result of this case, or the answer to this case, is empowering frontline employees to find their solution to their own problems. And how do you do that? Well, OC Tanner does that lots of ways. And the only way that really allows them to do that is because of the cultural enablers and the sort of the guiding principles that they live by. And they train their frontline employees on lean principles, and allow them to go make mistakes, or to iterate is the right way, to iterate over and over again to try to make different decisions. All right, so this was my class plan when I do this. My classes are actually kind of long. They're about 2.5 hours long. We have a condensed course that's about 7 weeks long, so we have longer classes. So I can get through all of this in one class. You might not be able to do this. I do the Deming red bead demonstration. The case talks about Deming and compares Deming to Taylor. So if you haven't done the Deming red bead demonstration, I suggest you just kind of go on YouTube and find a version of it. The result of the Deming red bead demonstration is that managers add value when they empower employees to sort of fix their own problems. But motivation in its own right, where threats and motivation through money don't work, right? That's what Deming would say, is that if you're a Taylorism type of manager where you're just sort of cracking the whip and saying, work harder, just do it the right way, do it the way I'm telling you to do it, it's not gonna be effective. So it's a nice setup to talk about what's going on in this case. And then we spend 15 minutes or so really pulling apart the problem that's in the case. And then the OC Tanner management philosophy. Tell me why, how do they manage? What's going on that you read in the case that seems sort of different from what other management philosophies you've seen? And then again, I asked the students to pull from the case, and there's a bunch of different examples in the case, all the elements of the Shingo model, which in a second, I have a slide that sort of describes with a focus on the guiding principles. And then, whoops, went too far. And then finally, after we've kind of pulled that all apart, how then would we address this problem of Shane? The Shane has a problem, and really address it is we make sure we use it, because there's sort of two solutions here. Shane, the protagonist, could say, here's the answer, or he could go hire an outside consultant, or he could hire an engineer to come fix the problem. That's not what they do at OC Tanner. Instead, they empower the frontline employees to figure out how to make the world. They go to the frontline employees and say, we need to cut costs. Here's why. Here's what it needs to be. And they figure it out, right? And it's great because I've had Shane come to class and he describes that really, really well. And actually will even describe, here's what they did. And it's at that point very tactical. And most of it we don't even understand because they're doing a type of manufacturing that most of us don't really fully understand. But the idea is that these frontline employees actually came up with the solutions. So here's Gary Anderson. I'm gonna switch over. We tried this before and it didn't really work real well. This is one of the videos that's in the Gary Peterson. I said the wrong name. In one of the videos in the case. I want to show it to you just so you can get an idea of kind of the feel of the case. I gotta go do a different slide. All right, here he is, OC Tanner. So here's Gary talking about, I want to make sure I got this shared right. Whoops. Yep. Okay.
This is our strategy wall, and it helps communicate the way we show our people what really matters and what they can do to contribute to the overall well-being of the company. And it all starts with the principle statements. These are principles that we've gotten from the Shingo model, which means an awful lot to us. And these are the principles that our people really connect with. Lead with humility, respect every individual, assure quality at the source, seek perfection, create constancy of purpose, those kind of ideas. These are bedrock for us. And in the black letters here, we've kind of written a description of what we mean by the principle. And I'm convinced that you go on the floor, you talk to any employee here, I don't know that they necessarily rattle off the principles, but you talk to them about respecting individuals, they'll know what you're talking about, and they'll feel about it the way that we've written about it here. And we try to reinforce this because again, we find this is foundational to all of the things that happen. So having the principles, then we decide, well, what is it that we need to have in place in the teams, on the floor, throughout our organization, so that we can support these principles. And that's where we come up with the systems, creating the systems. Like we have a coaching and training system. Not surprisingly, the coaching and training supports this idea of respecting individual. It teaches people how to embrace scientific thinking. It helps them understand the importance of seeking perfection. It reinforces constancy of purpose. All of the different systems help us accomplish the principles. That's why they exist.
Great. So let me stop this. So I do want to show you while I still have this up. Oh, I thought I had it up. Maybe I don't. Never mind. Oh, actually, it's over here. Change my share here. So here's the case itself. Again, totally 18 pages long. It was about 13 pages of text. And then here's the Shingo. This is like the newest version. Mary, I might be wrong, but here's the newest version from last year of the Shingo model booklet, which is available online, I think. Somebody might have asked, is there a YouTube or a link to that? I'm pretty sure it is. Mary might have to figure it out for us. But this is a nice booklet, right, for the students to kind of take a look at. Great. So Gary there does a really good job of describing why the principles matter. Sorry, I'm trying to switch shares here. Go back to, don't you love this new world we live in where there it is. Okay. So he does a great job of discussing the guiding principles. So in the class itself, I get the students to kind of pull out each of these principles of the guiding principles. Give me an example. Tell me why that's important, and how does that apply to, to thinking about supply chain and operations decisions. Right? This is a supply chain class, and so it's a fun discussion to talk about some of these things. So that's what we've talked about flow and pull previously before this class usually. So that's a fun one to talk about, and why these matter. So this guiding principles then fits into this bigger model that we call the Shingo model. And so then Gary just talks about that the systems in place then interact with the guiding principles. So again, throughout the case, there's examples of this that aren't explicit, but that are in there. And so in the case discussion itself, we make them explicit, right? We say, tell me explicitly what systems do they have in place that seem to align with the guiding principles, and how does that interact with the culture, the tools, and lead to the results that they want. Anyway, so it's a fun case to introduce the Shingo model. When I first moved here to Utah State, I wasn't really familiar with the Shingo model as intimately as I probably should have been, and so I hoped that and in fact I met with Gary at some point, and Gary said, we really like to hire your students. The problem is a lot of times they come out of Utah State and don't know what the Shingo model is, and that's a little bit embarrassing, right? Given that we have the Shingo Institute here, that we should make sure our students know what it is. So this case for us fills that gap for our MBA students, right? By the time they leave this case, they should have a pretty good idea of the general principles of the Shingo model, and a great example of a company that's done very well using it. Okay? So I think that's all I have on this OC Tanner case. Let's take a pause. Are there any questions, Vijay?
So Eric Olson does have a question, actually more general questions. We actually got a couple of questions coming in that are less tied directly to the case, but more general. The first one is from Eric Olson. Any experience using agile sprints to do cases where students move in and out of breakouts?
Yeah, we did that a lot this year with doing it through Zoom, where I would ask a question and then throw them into smaller groups and then come back. And I think that's a great way to do it. In fact, going back into live classes, you could still do that, but you'd have to do it sort of smaller discussions, right? The students really like that because sometimes students are intimidated, oftentimes, speaking in public, but they're more likely to speak in small groups. I think that's what you're trying to ask. That's a great way to try to get more involvement from different students. Yeah.
Great. So another question, a little bit different. This is coming from Robert Slagle. To implement lean in a company, would you attempt to teach your team members the same way you would to students? So this question is framed in the context of a startup and with challenges to change culture and get people to understand and care about the little issues that grow and snowball into major challenges.
I don't know. That's a really good question. I would expect that teaching cases like this in a company would be a challenge. I don't have experience doing that so much, so I don't know. Maybe there's someone else that chime in to answer that question. It's a good question, Robert. I don't know. Robert, you have some thoughts?
Yeah. So my challenge has just been getting people to understand and care and have a consistent, motivation for things around here. And I just don't feel most people see the value of doing the small things like the visual cues, having standard work, stuff like that, like the boring things at work, I would say. But then, about every 3 or 4 months, we have, issues where it could have been solved at the root cause of the issue, but it doesn't get ignored till it starts affecting our production often.
Yeah. I mean, again, the idea of cases and using stories might be helpful, right? To be able to say, here's some examples of some companies that have done really well. A traditional case, and perhaps after we have this discussion about FastCap, it might be a better way to introduce workers. I think they'd probably be more likely undergrads in the sense that they don't want to have to prepare for like a training. They don't have to read all this. MBA students we can ask a lot of and say, you got to do 2 hours worth of prep before you show up. Your team workers, your team, probably not, right? But there are some really good examples of companies that have done really well. And so if we can get people to realize, students to realize, because they did that, then it led them to be successful, right? Making the connection is the key, I'd say. Good question, Robert. Let's see if we can, if someone else has some chime in by the end about how does this apply outside of the classroom. I'd love to hear more about that. So,
Thank you.
Anything else, VJ?
That is it on questions thus far. So
great. So I'm looking at the clock. We about, I'm take too long to I always talk too much. This is my problem. Over prepare, talk too much. So I'll go quickly through FastCap and then make sure we have a few minutes at the end to have some questions. So FastCap, if you're not familiar with them, they are a small company led by Paul Akers, who's a big kind of lean guru nowadays. And also a friend of the university just because we asked him to be, not because he's in Utah, but just because we reached out to him and he's just a really nice guy. He has been involved in the Shingo Institute for a while too, I think. FastCap, they originally made like little caps that would cover screws for cabinet makers that are just sort of glue backed caps. So before FastCap, you had to buy a specific cap that was specific to the screw that you would use when you made cabinets. And Paul and his team said, well, that's dumb. Why do we care? Because then they had to hold a whole bunch of different types of screw end caps. So he said, just cut that off and put some sticky on there, and then it's good to go. So, if you've ever made IKEA furniture, you've seen sort of what I mean is to cover up the screw. So that's their first product, but now they make all kinds of products for cabinet makers, woodworkers, sort of custom home builders to make their work easier and better, right? So they are a lean company in the sense that they manufacture stuff in a very lean way and their supply chain is lean, but they also make lean stuff. So it's kind of a fun company to look at. So where does this fit in my curriculum? So this is for our undergrads, all of our undergrad business majors, which we have 5 different majors, they have to take an operations management course as part of their core curriculum. So I get students from all these different majors, and it's like a 7-week class that's pretty fast. And we have a module that's 1 week, we talk about lean management. One of those 7 weeks, we talk about lean management. And one of those, we 2 days every week. So one of those days we do what I'm about to show you. And then the other day we usually do like a simulation. I have multiple different types of kind of lean simulations. There's lots of them out there. So this is kind of the intro to lean. And then we kind of see the second day we would see they go out and do some kind of simulation. So what do they prepare? Well, not much. There is a textbook chapter about lean management, but the chances that they actually read it are very slim. So they don't prep much to show up to this class. Some of them have read a textbook chapter or two. They do also have to do these major big projects throughout the semester. So some of them may have done a project that allows them to learn a little bit more about lean before this class shows up. What are the objectives of this class? Well, these are different. The first one's pretty similar, right? Students are introduced to lean, not a lean, it should be lean principles, tools, terms, and ideas. This is an introduction. Like here's a whole bunch of stuff. The big one is this terms. I have a fun way to do that. Think about, here's a bunch of different new words. A lot of them are Japanese words. And what do they mean? And then part of the case part is the students are challenged to defend lean as a management philosophy, which is I think pretty fun to say, okay, is this how you would manage your company? Would you? Why would you? Why wouldn't you? Right. And so then I usually, in a second, I'll show you, but we split the class up and say, half of you say, yeah, this is the way to run a company. The other half sort of say no. And then they have like a little discussion in class about the pros and cons of this type of philosophy. Okay. So here's my class plan. I'll show you in a second. I say, hey, we're going to play bingo today. And I give them a link to play lean bingo, which is a whole bunch of lean terms, which allows them to be engaged when we watch these videos. Anytime they hear a term, they get to play bingo. You know how bingo works. And then they start screaming bingo when they get it. We really short talk about lean as a philosophy, a little mini lecture. We watch a Toyota video. We debrief the lean terms from the lean bingo. We watch a 5S video. And then depending on how much time, we could just watch FastCap videos for the next 10 hours. We don't have that much time, but FastCap, there's a ton of videos about FastCap. So we usually get through at least one, but sometimes a couple others. And then I introduce students to the rest of his videos. I'll show you in a second what I mean. He's got hundreds of videos, Paul Akers does. So here's Lean Bingo. In fact, you can go out there right now if you want, tinyurl.com/lean bingo. And you'll get your own unique bingo card. You could do it right now. You could play along. This is just an open source software. You can make your own flashcard if you want. But the idea here is to get students to pay attention to words that they've never heard before when they're watching these videos. So, and then quickly, again, what do we mean by lean philosophy? Well, it's not just the set of tools. So before this, I say, what do you know about lean? And they usually say, oh, it's about, doing cutting waste. Like that's kind of what they might know. And I say, actually, it's a philosophy. What do I mean by philosophy? And then I get them to talk to me about, well, philosophy is a way of thinking. It's not just, it's not just like one tool or one little thing, but it's actually a whole collective way of thinking. And then here's sort of whoops, you've seen these before probably. Here's sort of the 5 pillars or premises of the lean philosophy. So we talk about these quickly. And then I say, okay, now we're going to watch this really cool Toyota video that's got awesome music. We'll watch the first 30 seconds of it together here because we're out of time. And then play the lean bingo game. So again, let me switch screens. For some reason, it wasn't working in PowerPoint when we tested this before. So we're going to, actually, you know what? I'm going to just show, we're not going to watch this whole thing. So I'm just going to play it right here. So this is on YouTube. This is a Toyota video that has lots and lots and lots of terms in it. It's probably 5 minutes long. We're not going to watch it all, but it's in a forklift plant in Spain. So there's a Toyota forklift plant in New York that looks exactly like this that I've been to before. And so for a lot of students, this is the first time they've ever really seen a manufacturing setting is in a video like this. So here's the cool music at the beginning. Are you ready? Here it comes. So it's 7.5 minutes, almost 8 minutes long. So I'm going to fast forward a little bit.
Created to benefit Toyota's customers, employees, and products. So, what does this mean for our customers and their businesses? TPS is an expression of the Toyota Way, a philosophy containing 5 core values: Genshi Genbutsu, Kaizen, challenge, teamwork, and respect. These
All right, so the video just goes through and shows a bunch of examples of all these different things. So it's a great introduction to TPS and to Lean in general. And once we get through that, about halfway through the video, someone has won the bingo game, almost certainly. So by the time we finish that video, then we go through all the terms that they just heard, right? And then I say, what does that mean? How does it, and if we don't know what the mean is, then I say, look it up. Let's find it online. They all have phones, right? They can figure out things really fast. And they'll find some definition of what all these terms are. So this just gets us into the terms. Now we kind of understand what these terms mean and what they are. The video doesn't talk a lot about 5S. It's in there, but it goes really, really fast. So that's one I think it's kind of fun to talk to with undergrads. So there's another video that we show that's a 5S video that's in a hospital setting. Which I think is cool too. We're just in manufacturing. So now we're going to say, well, does this apply somewhere else? Yeah, it applies everywhere. So this is in a little warehouse or a storage unit, a storage space in a hospital. And it's just a 5S project, right? There's a bunch of these different videos on YouTube, but I found this one a few years ago and I think it's pretty nice. So let's watch just a minute of it. It's this is 5 minutes long. So you can see right away, this eats up a class pretty fast if we are watching this video. This is one. So large supply room, and then they go through all the steps of 5S, and by the end, it's like super clean and organized, and we love it. And to stress this at the end is the 5th S is the hard one, which is sustain, right? Making sure it always stays clean, which is like my 14-year-old's bedroom, right? I can get him to clean his room, but it doesn't stay clean. Finally, we get to FASTCAP, which is, I said FASTCAP is actually what this case is about. And this we spend a bit more time on, right? So we said, now we're going to talk about a company that has used this in different ways. So this is Paul Akers right here. This first video is just an intro to the company, and it's about 30 seconds long. Let's watch it.
Hey, Paul Akers here with FASTCAP. What is FASTCAP? A product development company specializing in products for cabinet makers and general contractors. We have over 900 products. We've been in business for 20 years, and I started it all in my garage. Why is FASTCAP such a dynamic company? Because we get all of our ideas from people like you, the actual people that are doing the work, the general contractors, the cabinet makers, the woodworkers. So if you want to know more about great innovative products that are going to save you time and money, go to fastcap.com. You're going to love our company. Thanks a lot.
All right, so that's the intro. And then he has this other video. We're running out of time, so we're definitely gonna watch it all. But this is his video that's a lean factory tour. So this is basically like a Gemba walk of his factory. And it's like 10 minutes long, 13 minutes long. And we watched the whole thing in class. And it's really cool, right? So he goes through like the entire process of manufacturing, shipping, and even like their office space. And he points out all kinds of things throughout this video. Now we're running out of time, so we're not going to have a lot of time. But by the end of this video, the students are usually like, holy cow, this guy's crazy, right? So Paul Akers is crazy. Like he's just crazy cool. Like he's a cool, good guy. But he is really, really invested in this. And so then we can have this discussion about, all right, what do you think about this as a philosophy? You can see that this is really embedded in everything he's done for his small business. What do you think about this in terms of a philosophy, right? So it's not just these huge Toyota companies, but this is, a small, relatively small entrepreneurial type company. Would you want to run this way? And there are almost certainly, always, every time I've done this, students that say absolutely, and students that say no way, this guy's OCD, right? So then we have a discussion about, well, is it okay to think, would you want to work at a place like this? And people are like, well, yeah, I guess I would. It's clean. It's a manufacturing setting, but it doesn't feel like a manufacturing setting. Work is really easy. I don't have to struggle to get what I need. And so it's pretty easy to sort of make a case for this is a pretty nice way to work, right? So at that point, I'm going to switch over and show you just a few other things with the FASTCAP. If there's time in the class, then sorry, I'm going to share a different screen. Then I share a couple other videos of Paul Akers, but let me show you what's out there. Come on, this one's what I want. So here's FastCap. You're seeing, okay. So here's FastCap. There's the one we just watched. This one's kind of cheesy. Here's the one that I show them. He also has a 2.0 where he does it again. So you could choose which one to watch. I wouldn't watch both of them. But then if you click on videos right here, you get this. Look how many videos he has. So one of his philosophies or his thinking is that all of the employees that work for him have to make improvements. He calls them 2-second improvements. And then they have to actually make a video of what they've done. So this is actually just a fraction of the videos. He has hundreds and hundreds of videos that are internal anytime anyone makes a change. So the ones that I end up showing, I show one that's on a 2-second improvement. So by the way, here's the 2-second lean book. Let me open this up too. I show this to the students. I don't want to take a whole lot more time. The 2-second lean book that he wrote is an easy read, and he basically gives it away, right? So you can buy it on Amazon for like $10, but you can go to this website and I give it to the students, and it's on my PowerPoints too, that you can get, and you can get it in an audio version. He has an app now that he'll read it to you. And it's a fun book, right? My wife found it at our house and read it and was like, hey, we should do this. So it's the kind of book that anybody can pick up and be like, oh, this isn't weird. This is kind of fun. And he likes it. So getting students involved in that. So I have a video of a 2-second lean improvement that's actually like the gardener at his place, right? So I say, this is the gardener. This is not like an employee that's making anything or shipping anything. He's mowing the lawn and he's doing this, right? So that's kind of fun. And then I have a Kanban. He has a nice Kanban system, like a card system. And that's a term and a word that most students don't know what that is, right? Our next module is on inventory. So it's a good way to get into inventory. So I show them his Kanban system of cards that trickle all the way back up the line so that there's signals for production. So there's never overproduction. They never run out of stuff. There's just a constant flow through the system. So those are the 2 videos I end up showing. Let me go back to my PowerPoint. So that's about it. Stop this. Go back here. I think that's all I got. Yeah, we're going to that. So here's again, the book I share. Here's the 2-second improvement. He calls it Fix What Bugs You. And then we talk about Kanban for a minute, and then here's his Kanban card system that we watch that video too, if we have time. So sometimes we run out of time. Okay, so that's it for me. I think that video case is a nice one that I've used, again, for undergrads that doesn't require the same level of preparation as you would for a full Harvard-style case. And the students are engaged and excited. So in our class, again, they have to choose a project that they have to do 3 different projects throughout the term. And they choose one of the topics, basically. So through this topic, I get about half the students are like, man, I want to learn more about lean. And so they go and they read the 2-second lean and they kind of check out some more stuff and create a project around lean. Some of them go do a 5S project or something like that. They do fun stuff. So it's a good way to get students engaged and excited about what can be done with lean. So cool. So that's all I have. VJ, any questions? We got like 1 minute.
Well, we have no more questions, but again, thanks for that, Mike. Great overview in terms of how you can use a case to teach lean. No extra charge. The audience also got some insights into other tools, videos, pedagogical tricks that we might use to sort of bring lean into the classroom. So that's excellent. One of the things I think we'll do as a follow-up to this morning's session is maybe try to create a mechanism whereby for those of you who are using various additional resources to make teaching lean more exciting, we'll try to sort of create sort of a mechanism to sort of collect that, share it. I know through the Lean Educators website, we've tried to do that in the past, but I think part of our goal with this whole series is to just exchange ideas, share best practices, and maybe we can use today's session to sort of jumpstart that effort. So we're right on time here at 10:30. So just as a, again, thanks to everybody for participating today. It's been a great session, first of many, hopefully very exciting webinars. A reminder that the next in this series, June the 8th. Mike's made several references this morning to the Shingo model, the Shingo framework, and the Shingo Institute. My hope is that most, if not all of you, are familiar with Shingo, the Shingo Institute here in the Huntsman School at Utah State University. The folks there are our partners in putting on this webinar series. But in our next session on June the 8th, we will have Ken Snyder, who is the executive director of the Shingo Institute, talk about the Shingo model and how the Shingo model itself can be deployed effectively as a framework for driving classroom and pedagogical discussions about lean. So with that, again, thanks everybody for participating this morning. We look forward to seeing you again June the 8th.